You pick up your phone for no reason at all. There's no notification, no buzz, no reason to look, but your thumb moves anyway and the screen lights up and you're scrolling before you even know what you were looking for. You tell yourself it's a bad habit, a lack of self-control, something you should simply be able to stop. But the real answer is far stranger than weak willpower. Your brain isn't broken, it's running code that's roughly 200,000 years old inside a world it was never built for. Think about that moment again, the unlock, the scroll, the blank stare at a feed you didn't plan to open. It happens dozens of times a day, and most of the time, you don't actually decide to do it. Something older than decision-making is pulling the trigger. So what is it? It's tempting to call this laziness, or boredom, or some personal failure of discipline that a little more self-control could fix. Most people blame themselves for exactly this kind of moment, dozens of times a week, without ever asking where the impulse actually comes from. But this isn't really about discipline at all. It's about a piece of machinery in your skull that is millions of years older than the device in your hand. And that machinery has a very specific history. To understand what's happening, you have to go back to a small wooden box in the 1950s, where a psychologist named B.F. Skinner was studying pigeons. Skinner built a box with a lever. Every time a pigeon pecked it, sometimes food appeared. Not every time, sometimes. When the reward came on a fixed, predictable schedule, the pigeon pecked at a steady, almost bored pace all the way. It already knew what was coming, so there was no urgency in the searching. But when the reward came randomly, the pigeon pecked harder, faster, and almost couldn't stop. Skinner called this a variable ratio reinforcement schedule, and it remains one of the most powerful patterns known for driving repetitive behavior in any animal, including you. Stronger than a guaranteed reward. Stronger even than no reward at all. It's the exact mechanism behind a slot machine. And it's the exact mechanism behind your phone. You don't know if the next scroll brings something interesting, a funny video, a message from someone you like, a tiny piece of good news, or nothing at all. That uncertainty isn't a flaw in the design. It is the design. But why would an uncertain reward feel more compelling than a sure one? That question doesn't have an easy answer, and for decades, even neuroscientists got it wrong. In the early 1990s, a researcher named Wolfram Schultz was recording the activity of dopamine neurons in monkeys while they waited for a small reward, usually a few drops of juice. He expected the dopamine surge to arrive with the juice itself, at the moment of pleasure. Instead, he found something almost backwards. The dopamine spiked earlier, at the cue, in the moment of anticipation, before the monkey knew whether the juice was actually coming. And when the reward became fully predictable, when the timing and amount were always the same, the dopamine response shrank. The brain stopped reacting to a sure thing. But when Schultz made the outcome uncertain, sometimes more juice, sometimes less, sometimes none, the dopamine spikes grew bigger and they lasted longer. Dopamine, it turns out, was never really a pleasure chemical. It's a wanting chemical. It fires hardest in the gap between not knowing and finding out. This single discovery quietly rewrote decades of assumptions about motivation. Pleasure, the actual experience of enjoying something, turned out to run on a different system almost entirely. Dopamine wasn't rewarding you for getting something good. It was rewarding you for checking. Does that sound familiar? It should, because that gap is exactly where you live every time you check your phone. You're not really addicted to the phone itself. You're addicted to the maybe, the small surge of anticipation that fires a half second before the screen finishes loading. This isn't just a theory about anticipation either. It runs all the way down to the wiring of the reward system itself. Back in 1954, two researchers named James Olds and Peter Milner placed a tiny electrode into the brain of a rat in a region tied to reward and let the rat press a lever to trigger a small electrical pulse to that exact spot. The rats didn't press the lever occasionally. Some pressed it thousands of times in a single hour. They ignored food. They ignored water. They pressed the lever until they collapsed from exhaustion, chasing a feeling that was, in the end, just a flicker of electricity in the right part of the brain. That experiment is unsettling for a reason. It shows that the reward circuit in your skull doesn't actually care what triggers it. It doesn't require food, safety, or even a real benefit. It just requires the right kind of signal, delivered in the right unpredictable rhythm. A glowing screen lighting up your hand at random intervals is more than capable of producing that signal. So why would evolution build a brain this easy to hijack? Wouldn't a steady, reliable reward have been more useful for survival? Not for the kind of survival your ancestors actually needed. For most of human history, survival didn't come from sitting still with a guaranteed supply of food. It came from searching, scanning the horizon, checking the next bush, the next riverbank, the next patch of forest, most of the time finding nothing at all. Anthropologists who study modern hunter-gatherer groups, including the Hadza of Tanzania, have documented just how much of daily life is built around exactly this kind of search behavior. Foraging isn't a steady task with a known outcome. It's a gamble repeated constantly throughout the day, where most attempts turn up empty, and only a few turn up something worth the effort. A brain that gave up easily after a few failed searches would starve. A brain that kept checking, driven forward by the chance of something good just one search away, would survive long enough to pass that wiring on. Researchers studying this pattern have given it a name: information foraging. The idea that humans search for knowledge using the same instincts animals use to search for food in short bursts, constantly weighing the cost of looking against the chance of finding something worthwhile. Your phone didn't invent this behavior, it simply gave it a new hunting ground. Every app icon is a patch of unexplored forest. Every notification is a rustle in the bushes that might be food or might be nothing. Every pull to refresh gesture is quite literally modeled after a slot machine lever. And that resemblance is not an accident. A researcher named Natasha Schul spent years studying the design of casino slot machines, and what she documented was unsettling. Machine designers weren't just building games of chance, they were engineering what she called the machine zone, a state where a person loses track of time, money, and even their own intentions, locked into the rhythm of pulling a lever again and again. The people who built the first addictive social feeds studied exactly this kind of behavioral engineering. Infinite scroll, so there's never a natural stopping point. Unpredictable likes, so every post becomes a tiny gamble. Notification badges in red, a color your visual system is wired to register as urgent, even when the content behind it is nothing at all. None of this is random. It is psychology carefully dressed up as convenience, and it sits in your pocket fully charged all day long. So here's the twist. The thing you've been calling a bad habit isn't a personal failure. It's an ancient survival mechanism, reverse-engineered with remarkable precision and pointed directly at you dozens of times a day by people who understand your brain's reward system better than you do. You're not weak. You're outmatched by design. But understanding why something happens is usually the first step toward noticing it as it happens, and noticing changes the entire equation. Picture your ancestors again, scanning the horizon for movement, for food, for danger, for anything that might actually matter. That instinct kept them alive in a world built from scarcity and real consequences. Now picture what you're actually scanning for. Most nights, most mornings, most idle minutes in between. A like, a reply, a video that will be forgotten by tomorrow. The hunting ground changed. The hunter never got the memo. Scientists have a term for this kind of situation when an instinct that once kept a species alive ends up working against it in a changed environment. They call it evolutionary mismatch. A craving for sugar made sense when fruit was rare and calories were scarce. A craving for novelty made sense when new information might mean food, danger, or opportunity. Neither instinct knew the world would someday be flooded with the very thing it was built to chase. Your phone sits at the exact center of that mismatch. It offers unlimited novelty on demand with none of the scarcity that once kept the searching in check. There is no bottom to the feed. There is no point where the environment runs out of new things to show you, the way a forest eventually runs out of unexplored ground. And the cost isn't only the minutes lost. Researchers studying attention have found that switching between tasks, even briefly, leaves a kind of residue behind. A lingering distraction that makes it harder to focus fully on whatever comes next. Every check, even the pointless ones, even the ones with nothing on the other side, quietly taxes the same attention you need for almost everything else in your day. Think about the last time you reached for your phone in bed, telling yourself it would only be a minute. The room was dark. The day was over. There was nothing left to forage for. No real decision waiting to be made. And yet your thumb moved anyway. Because somewhere underneath the conscious part of your mind, An ancient circuit was still scanning the horizon, still checking the bushes, still running a search routine built for a world that no longer exists. And maybe that's the most uncomfortable part of all this. Your brain isn't built for the world you currently live in. It's still running an operating system designed for the savannah, the forest, the cave, a world where searching mattered because survival was actually on the line. So tonight, when you feel your thumb drifting toward your phone for no reason at all, you might remember where that motion really comes from. Not weakness, not laziness, just 200,000 years of evolution quietly running in the background, mistaking a notification for a rustle in the grass.